Hello and welcome to the India Energy Hour. I am Sandeep Pai, a former journalist with Hindustan Times and now an energy researcher at the University of British Columbia.
And I'm Shreya Jay, journalist with Business Standard newspaper in Delhi, writing and reporting on the energy sector.
Together, we are really excited to co host a new podcast on India's energy transition, the India Energy Hour. This podcast is hosted by 101 Reporters, an innovative news agency that connects grassroots reporters and media houses to bring out untold stories. The show is produced by Tejas Dayanand Sagar of 101 Reporters.
In this podcast, we want to unpack and document India's energy transition. We will interview leading energy, development, and climate experts from academia, civil society, and the government. Through these interviews, we will explore the most pressing hurdles and promising opportunities in the energy transition unfolding in India. We will examine the role of government, finance, social justice, and science. Over time, we will feature other countries of the global south as well. The last decade has seen a phenomenal growth of renewable energy in India, but many challenges remain even today. In the inaugural episode of the India Energy Hour, Vinay Rustagi, co-founder and managing director Bridge to India, joins us to look back at the journey of renewable energy in India and discuss the current challenges and future opportunities. As the head of the foremost consultancy in the renewable energy space, Vinay is renowned for offering analytically critical views on the energy sector and its policies.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the show, Vinay.
Thank you, Sandeep, and thank you, Shreya. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we want to start by understanding your journey and involvement in the energy sector. What did you study? Were you always interested in the energy sector? Tell us about your journey. What motivated you to start Bridge to India? And it turns out that Bridge to India's journey is in sync with the growth of solar sector in India. So just elaborate on your sort of like history and your own involvement with the sector.
Sure, Sandeep. So I think this is going to be a long answer. So I did my MBA and was very interested in the field of finance. And that was back in the mid-90s. So I spent about, I would say, more than 15 years in banking, working mainly in project finance and financing all kinds of big ticket projects in oil and gas, transport, infrastructure. And then, funnily enough, I did work in the power sector for a little bit. But then towards the end, around 2010-11, I started focusing on more and more renewables. And I have to say, at that point of time, it just seemed like a novelty. It seemed like a niche sector, and nobody knew what this thing is going to kind of, what the future potential is, etc., etc. And at that time, I was working in the UK. So I was working in the UK, and the renewable sector was beginning to grow very rapidly in Germany, Italy, UK, etc. And then towards the end of 2011, we moved to India. And then I worked on a few more renewable deals, solar and wind project financing in India. And it kind of started becoming more and more obvious to me that this is not like, one of these kind of new things which is happening. This can actually become very, very big. It's got a huge potential. And at that time, partly because, I wanted to do something of my own, partly because I kind of saw the potential in renewable energy. So, some of these things kind of came together. And I decided, mainly because kind of I've seen how the sector grew very rapidly in Europe and outside India, I kind of just took the plunge and decided that this was the way for India as well. So this could be a good, interesting opportunity. And you're right. We were actually almost when we founded Bridge to India, sector was in very, very early stages, incipient stages of growth. And then it was very early days. And I think interestingly, not many people were in the same boat as us. I think so. We really had an early mover advantage. We saw the potential. We kind of worked on some kind of, would say, fairly groundbreaking reports highlighting, what renewables could mean for India. We established a very strong network with the key stakeholders in India. MNRE, CERC, companies like Tata BP, who were one of the early movers in the sector. And then things really grown from there. I have to say, until even I always kind of believed when we founded Bridge to India that this was going to be a huge sector. But until 2000, I would say 13, 14, or 15, we did not know how big this could become. And I think what is even happening even now is kind of exceeding our expectations. So, we are very happy that we kind of timed it well. So that has really kind of helped us. We have I would say, pretty ringside view of the sector now. A fairly, I would say, strong position, with kind of all the major players as a client. So delighted. But then again, there's this, and I still believe that the future is going to be immense. I think this thing, it is not like a 10 or 20-year business cycle. This is like a 50-year opportunity. This is like as big as internet in some ways, right? So I think we're going to see coal and oil and gas being phased out over the next 20, 30 years, and it will be all renewables. I mean, of course, the beauty is that it's not just going to be solar and wind. New technologies are going to come, new business models are going to come. There will be many, many more challenges. So, unlike oil and gas and coal, which are like very staid, formulaic sectors, this thing is going to be constantly evolving. Huge challenges for governments, policymakers, and other stakeholders, which I have to say is ideal environment for a consultant. So we are very happy to be in this space at this point in time.
Were there any people who inspired you to get into the sector, or like you read somebody's report or somebody's work and got inspired, be it in India or abroad? Like, were there some inspirations?
I would say not really individuals, but of course there have been some businesses internationally which have kind of pushed us higher and kind of shown what can be done. And I would say mainly it is two businesses. One is Bloomberg New Energy Finance. That again, business started as a kind of a very small independent business, and then obviously it was taken over by Bloomberg, and then it grew into a kind of a big path-breaking kind of business. And then the other one is in the US, there used to be a company called Green Tech Media. They started out again as a boutique independent company, predominantly as a research company. But then they grow again. They've grown into a pretty big, formidable business, covering pretty much the whole global market. They do a lot of events, publish and cover a number of sectors. And then they got acquired by Wood Mackenzie, which is a large Europe-based consulting company. So I won't really say inspired, but I think we have seen some of these businesses like ours, consulting and knowledge-driven businesses, how they have grown worldwide. And I think they have given us a little bit of a template. I mean, we are not trying to copy them, but of course we can see this is the direction in which they're doing, the kind of work they're doing. It is always giving us new ideas in terms of how that applies. And of course, whatever they're doing in their countries, we can't copy it as it is in India. I mean, India is a very unique and challenging market. The price points are very low. People are not really willing to pay for knowledge. Even today, ironically, a developer and an investor is very happy to go and bid, super aggressively in hundreds of millions of bucks. But, if I tell them that, look, you pay me X rupees and, we can give you a much better return, they will say, no, I know this already and I don't need it. So it is a very, challenging market for a knowledge-driven business. But nonetheless, I think we have learned from other businesses around the world the direction and the way we can kind of shape our own business.
If I can ask a follow-up question, because this is something that I wanted to always ask you, that if you look at the renewable energy sector since the time it has started, everyone is so gaga about it. Tariff falls, people go dancing, any new policy comes, people go and praise it. What I always tell people about Bridge to India is that you always stand out because you always, I will not say critical, but a very sensible view. How does that comes across industry and government?
Yeah, so that is a very, very good question, Shreya. It is even to this day, I can't get over it. Everybody is just so positive. Anything happens, whatever happens in the sector, safeguard duty is imposed, not imposed, imposed for 2 years or 10 years or whatever. People always say, "Fantastic, well done." Now a great development for the sector, and that is just people are I can't explain it, but behind the scenes, unfortunately, there is a lot of pain in the sector. There is a lot of anguish, and not everything is hunky dory. Not very everything is rosy. There are all kinds of challenges. People are making losses. People have exited the business because they've not been able to survive and sustain the low prices, the change in policies, all kinds of execution barriers, etc. I think this kind of I would say false positivity comes from one, the government always wants to make out that everything is well and is going in the right direction and they're working very hard, which they are. But I think they have not been really honest in acknowledging the problems. Second, I think the private sector. Because it is such a capital intensive sector and everybody is always in a mode to raise more and more money. I believe that they need to they feel that they need to send out positive messages constantly to their investors, their stakeholders, their own company employees, etc., etc. So there is this tendency to kind of always maintain this kind of overly optimistic and positive facade that everything is well, and of course there are challenges, but we'll get over it, etc. And we have, I come from, as I said, I come from a banking background, and banks are very, very cynical, partly because they can afford to be. If they don't like a deal, they just turn it away. And if a renewable project is not good enough, they'll finance a telecom project. If telecom project is not good enough, they'll finance real estate or something else. So banks always take the view that we have got no love lost for renewables, and that kind of drove my thinking. It's a very kind of in some ways it's a very dispassionate, critical view, analytical view. I won't say critical, but analytical view. And we don't make any attempt to kind of to kind of sugarcoat or smooth any kind of statements. If something happens and we disagree with it, if tariffs go too low, we always kind of like to say it as it is. And many people have noted that. I think there are very, very few people in the industry, developers, investors, consultants, or whoever, who kind of really kind of say it as it is. So yes, and I think it's good to know that it is being appreciated as such. But then, of course, it comes with its own pressures. If I make a statement today about a policy not being designed properly or a tender not being designed properly, we do get calls. Or if I even from the government, from the private sector, people saying, "Why did you write that? This is not the way. Things are so positive. You are being overly critical, etc." But then, I think nobody can always get it right. It is possible that sometimes we may be missing a perspective, or we may have got something wrong. We're not always. I'm not claiming that we know everything. But then, as long as we are doing an honest job, we are trying to portray a correct, analytically sound position. I'm very happy to maintain that. And we've always steadfastly held our view. Of course, if we have made a mistake, we're happy to be corrected. But otherwise, we are very happy to get into any argument or a discussion with all the stakeholders and justify ourselves. The other thing, just to add to that, we really have, I think a big part of this is that, this is what I always tell my team, that, you have the government, you have investors, you have banks, all these people, all this group of stakeholders in the sector, and they all have some interest in the sector, right? I don't mean it in a negative way, but they have a position which they need to maintain, and they have an interest, and they would be very happy if things go this way or that way. Whereas we are kind of sitting on the top. It is like we are watching the circus. This is happening, that is happening, etc. And luckily for us, we have clients. who've got businesses to run. We've got, all kinds of things that we are espousing for. But at least we have the luxury of observing everything, not being invested directly ourselves, and then just taking a very kind of helicopter view of the situation, and then which makes it actually very interesting and relevant. And many people don't have it. Even today, sometimes we find it shocking that a very big development happens and people just look at it from a very blinkered view. What does it mean for my business? If I get a good tariff, people go very happy. For example, you have the manufacturing tender, right? But then we can immediately see that good tariff is okay for you, but will the discom even buy it? So it's a very simple example. So that independent view and that helicopter seat kind of gives us this position and this advantage, and then we've been always kind of unafraid to kind of speak it out.
Right. I think that brings us to the next question, which was basically, as you said, that you have this helicopter view. So, from that view, how would you describe the journey of this renewable energy sector in the past decade or so? The past decade has mostly been dedicated to solar, but I would also like you to touch upon wind as well, because that was also the time that wind sector faced one of the worst time of its history. So, in the past years, how do you think renewable energy sector has progressed in terms of policies, in terms of new investors or these new poster boys coming in the sector? How would you describe the journey of renewable in this sector?
So I think clearly we've come a long way, Shreya. But very broadly, if I were to describe it, I would say that we had the first era of renewables when the cost was obviously very, very high. And the government's main objective was to make the cost affordable. And they offered all kinds of policies, whether it is viability gap funding or blending with thermal power or tax incentives, etc., to reduce the cost of renewables. I would say, very broadly speaking, that was renewables one, and that was, from 2010 onwards to, around about 2014-15. And then we went up this second phase of growth, which was like all about solar parks, big projects, auctions, tariffs coming down below 5 rupees. And then, all these IPPs, like, private equity money came in. And these IPPs like Renew, Azure, etc., became these kind of, big multi-gigawatt kind of operations. And that is like renewables too. And we during this phase from 1 to 2, we went from like, less than 1 gigawatt a year to about 10 gigawatts every year now. And I think where we are is that I think we are kind of struggling to break away from 2. I mean, of course, the tariffs keep going down, but we are not able to go to renewables 3, the third gear, so to say. And if you see, the government target now is 450 gigawatts, which means we need to be adding about 35 gigawatts of new capacity every year. But where we are stuck is at like, somewhere between 8 to 10 gigawatts, which is what we've been doing for the last 3 years. And we are stuck in that level because there are a number of challenges which are kind of, in my view, are becoming more daunting by the day, be it land, transmission, policy, etc. So I think we really need a kind of overhaul, the government needs to relook at the sector, needs to kind of form a new vision for the sector. Targets are fine. I think 450 gigawatt target is kind of an easy target to establish, but kind of really thinking about how can we grow from 8 or 10 gigawatts a year to 35 gigawatts a year? What does it take to set up 35 gigawatts of projects? I mean, that is an incredibly large amount of transmission capacity year on year that the government needs to build, financing that you need to arrange, jobs you need to create, people skills you need to kind of create. So we need a very kind of a holistic approach to renewables. We need a completely different paradigm of policy making because so far renewables has been supported through must-run, RPOs, just force it down on the discoms, etc. But then, the future is not about forcing renewables down the path of discoms and consumers. If we really want to kind of move away from coal and fossil fuels, how do we make renewables sustainable from a technology, operational, and financial point of view? And it needs much more work And that kind of holistic, long-term policy-making vision, I think, is kind of still lacking, unfortunately, because of which we are kind of stuck at this renewables 2.0.
So just a follow up on that, Vinay. Very
Yeah,
interesting, very, very interesting point. So let's say in a hypothetical situation, somebody makes you the top advisor and you have the ear of the prime minister or like the top person. What kind of that holistic policy, what would be your top advice? Like, how would you create that holistic, big picture understanding and vision to move forward, which is beyond these, announcements and headlines and targets?
yeah. So, we are not kind of policy experts per se, but I think there are a lot of commonsensical, basic things that can be done right. For example, I would say one thing is that if you want to set up 35 gigawatts of renewable projects every year, you kind of need to think at what all do you need for it. You need a lot of people with the right skills. You need land and transmission. You need debt financing. And then you need to think about how do I incorporate this 35 gigawatts of variable intermittent power into the grid and then supply firm power 24/7 basis to the consumers around the country. Now, and there needs to be properly dovetailed, coordinated action across each of these fronts, right? And what has happened, unfortunately, in the past is the targets have been set, RPOs have been determined, and then it is like, let's do the tender and auction, and then people find land is not there, transmission is not there, debt financing is a challenge. Now, why can't these things be all taken up in a very coordinated manner with a 5 to 10 year action plan? Now, some of these things are happening, but they're happening very blatantly. The government said, in 2015-16, when land and transmission started becoming bigger problems, the government came out with a solar park scheme. It was 20 gigawatts. And then that was very successful. It kind of attracted entry of people like SoftBank and some of the other international people like NG and NL, etc. And then it was very successful. And then the government said, we will expand it to 40 gigawatts. But then the scheme ran into all kinds of problems. And that 40 gigawatt target was for 2020. But I think to my mind, not more than 22 or 23 gigawatts has been developed. So that scheme ran into a lot of problems. And then again, there was a bit of complacency. And then the government started doing ISTS tenders, do what you want, go where you want, etc. And then again, we have come back to the same problem that land is not available, transmission is a problem. The developers are abandoning projects because of some of these issues. Like you may have heard Renew and Azure and some of the other developers abandoned projects. Many developers have exited the sector because of these issues. And now the government has again come back and said, let's develop 60 gigawatts of renewable energy zones or wind park zones, all kinds of lingo coming into there. So this is like back and forth that we see. Make in India. Make in India is not new. Make in India used to be there in 2012, 13 and 14. There was a petition for anti-dumping duty in 2013. The government came very close to implementing it, did not do it. Domestic content requirement came in. And then there were all kinds of MSIPs and other policies to support domestic manufacturing. But then again, that was like, it just went into, do something, not do something. It just went back and forth. And there was no concerted push or a sustained campaign to support domestic manufacturing. And then suddenly it just kind of burst open after COVID and after the border tension with China. And now again, there is a sustained push. So I think my view is that, don't take knee-jerk, ad hoc, short-term view. We need to have a very sustained, sound, consistent policy making, and then dovetailing across all the government departments. Even today, many times what happens is MNRE says that, we need basic customs duty. They say we will implement it from August onwards. That is what the minister has said publicly many times. But then it gets stuck with Ministry of Commerce. Then it gets stuck with Ministry of Finance. So I think there are these kinds of things which are really not helpful to the sector. And that is the reason, even today, despite all the government talk, manufacturing remains like a distant dream for the sector. So, long answer, but I think one thing we need is a very coordinated, long-term, consistent policy vision, which is not kind of changing from year to year. Second thing I would say a very major part, in my view, not which doesn't receive enough attention, is that we need to develop our own technology. We are completely handicapped on this front because everything, be it modules, inverters, trackers for the solar industry, and even wind turbines today, all the major suppliers are international suppliers. We take a lot of pride that wind turbines are made in India, but all the technology for these wind turbines and basically the critical supplies are still coming from outside India. The major suppliers in India for wind today are GE, Vestas, and Siemens Gamesa. All the domestic ones have nearly gone bankrupt. Suzlon, the biggest one, is also facing major problems. So I think if you have a huge industry which is poised to grow so rapidly over the next 20, 30, 40 years, and there's going to be a very kind of seismic shift in the energy sector from fossil fuels to renewables. And this is like a pillar of the economy, right? Which feeds into all the other sectors, be it steel, cement, etc., etc. You can't have a position where we are completely dependent on international technology. And then again, something else happens in terms of, border dispute or trade wars. We will again find ourselves in the same situation that we don't have technology, and you can't develop technology overnight. It's a Even today, when the government says that we will impose basic customs duty, etc., etc., all that will happen is that people will set up factories in India, but they will continue to import technology and key raw materials from China and other countries. So our dependence will still not be taken care of. So I think we really need to, and this is something which cannot be done in 2 or 3 or 5 years even. So we need like a 10, 20, 30-year kind of a vision to set up and build a domestic technology base, because I think we are kind of standing on one leg right now with so much dependence on foreign technology.
I have one more follow-up. Sorry, Shreya.
Sure.
It's just fascinating. And this is basically Shreya's question reiterating, um, can you speak a little bit about the last decade? And if you can distinguish between solar and wind, both in terms of support as well as the status of where it is in the last decade.
Yeah. Sorry, Shreya, I did not answer it in detail. So I think, these two technologies are very, very different in nature. Wind is largely a mechanical technology. Basically, you have this wind which is blowing, and then you need these fans to roll and produce power. And the major revolution in wind is that you basically capture bigger and bigger bigger and bigger turbines, which become operationally and physically more challenging to transport, to operate, etc. And that is why, even though the wind turbines have got more efficient, they produce more power. The PLFs have gone up from 17-18% 10 years ago to about 40%. But the cost of the turbine itself has increased very substantially at the same time. So which means the cost of wind power has not actually changed much in the last 10 years. We have, of course, seen bids below 3 rupees, but those bids are not viable. I would say even today, a viable price for wind power today in India is about 3.5 rupees. Of course, if you go to the best sites in Gujarat, you get cheap government land, you can produce power at 3 rupees or 3 rupees 10 paisa, but by and large, average, I would say it is 3 rupees 50 paisa. Now, that is in a very sharp contrast with solar. Solar is an electronic technology, and it is constantly improving. It is constantly improving by 5 to 10% at the very least. Actually, the cost has been coming down by almost 15% over the last 7 to 8 years. So, and that is the reason why solar power prices have fallen from 12 rupees to like 2.5 rupees today. The beauty is that this is expected to happen for the next 10 years or more going into the future. So unlike wind, which has kind of really hit a rough spot, like a maturity, which has reached maturity and kind of stability in terms of where the technology can go, and how far low the tariffs can go. Solar, we don't expect any kind of such stage to be reached even in the next 10 years. So, and then we talk about photovoltaic technology, but then, after photovoltaic, which if suppose it runs out and matures in the next 10 years, there are more new technologies which are expected to come to convert solar power into electric power. So the differences are that solar is on a much faster technology curve, because of which the efficiencies are improving, costs are coming down. Wind, that is not the case. The second big difference is that solar power is more predictable. Solar resource is much more predictable than wind resource. The third, of course, is that solar power is produced in the daytime, and wind power is produced in the evenings and night times, and even more so during the monsoon months, when India's power demand actually comes down, and hydropower and other power supply sources actually start producing more power. So, from all the 3 points of view, that solar is still on a constant learning curve. Uh, Power is produced during the daytime, and it is much more reliable and more stable, predictable source of power. I think solar has a huge advantage over wind, and that is why solar has gone from nowhere to like 8 gigawatts today in the last 10 years, and wind has gone reverse. It has gone from 3 to 4 gigawatts 10 years ago to about 1 gigawatt every year today. And so much so that today wind's main utility has only become how to supplement solar to provide more stable renewable power during the day and during the year. So today, the only wind tenders which are happening are basically hybrid tenders. Let's combine wind power with solar power so that you get power during the daytime, evening times, and night times, etc. And I think that is going to be the trend of the future.
Just in addition to that, given that we are talking about this journey of renewable, how much credit would you give to those investors who kept on bidding low, getting all these record low tariffs? Did it help or did it not? And what role do you think, the people who put in money played? The domestic banks were not interested in renewable energy sector when it started out. So all these private equity funds, pension funds, etc., jumped onto the Indian market. So let's talk about investors first. Those who were bidding low, they were obviously backed by these agencies who were putting in the money. So how much credit goes there for wherever India stands now in terms of renewable capacity?
Yeah, no, good question, Shreya. And I think, when we talk about the various challenges for the renewables, I think financing is always talked about. And in my view, actually, financing is not a big challenge for the sector, partly because of external reasons. Because the economy has slowed down, relatively speaking, over the last 5 years, demand for capital in India, particularly for bank finance from sectors like transport, infra, even thermal power, has gone down. So there is more money available for renewables. Second, there's almost like this, if I can use the word without kind of exaggerating, there's actually like a tsunami of capital flow, which is moving from conventional power and oil and gas and coal power to renewables. Today, India, even if India wanted to do 35 or 40 gigawatts of renewables, I would say financing will not be a problem, because all the major investors across the board, be it the sovereign wealth funds, the private equity funds, the oil and gas companies, the conglomerates like in India, you have Tatas, Birlas, Adanis, Mahindras, etc. Everybody is wanting to invest in renewables, because this is I think there is a recognition over the last 3, 4, 5 years that this is the sector of the future, and they can't deploy capital in other sectors. People have very shockingly belatedly realized that they can't keep on investing in thermal power. Companies like, NTPC, Adani's, Jindal's, only as recently as 1 year ago started saying that we will not invest more in thermal power, we will invest only in renewable power. So I think there is so much capital available today that capital is actually no longer a constraint. if anybody is struggling to raise capital, it is only because either the discount position is not strong, so they are concerned about the offtake risk and the discounts not being able to pay on time, or they are concerned about things like somebody is bidding too aggressively and the project itself may not make the necessary returns. But the absolute availability of capital for renewable power is actually there is no problem at all. In fact, we have more capital than required, and that is the reason why the bidding is so aggressive and the tariffs are going down so low. Now, has that helped India? Uh, you know, Obviously, it is not desirable. People bidding too aggressively and then not being able to make the necessary return. I don't think it is good for anybody, uh, even the government, I would say, because it creates all kinds of risks in the sector. Banking sector risk if the banks don't get paid on time. Projects very often get delayed because people have bid aggressively. They're not able to raise money, and when they bid aggressively, then there's no cushion in their financial model. Then they need to find the cheapest land, the cheapest equipment, etc., to justify building the project, and then they keep on delaying the project if that doesn't turn out to be the case. So there is a risk of delays, there is a risk of bankruptcies, there is a risk of banking sector losses, etc. So it is not good for the sector on the whole. Having said that, what has happened is that because tariffs have gone faster than they should have, it has definitely led to more demand from the discoms. Fortunately, there is also a much faster learning curve in renewables because of the shorter gestation period of projects. So, for example, in coal, in 2009, 10, 11, when there was aggressive bidding, nobody kind of saw the downside until 2014 and 15. The bankruptcies started happening in 2014, 15, 16 onwards because there is such a long development cycle of coal projects. In renewables, projects can be developed within 12 months, 12 to 18 months maximum. So if you bid aggressively today, you find out in 12 months what is the consequence. And because there's such a bit fast feedback loop, there is some kind of corrective action. So we saw, and that is why you see, there was tariffs went to 463, and then there was some kind of semblance of stability before tariffs went down to below 3 rupees, and again, tariffs was stable from when they reached to 244 and 245 levels. They were stable for about 2 years, despite many costs coming down, and now again tariffs have gone down to 2 rupees. So I think private sectors and this rush for investments is kind of making tariffs too low. All said and done, I think there will be pain in the private sector because of that. But I think by and large, I think India and the private power sector is in a very privileged position because of this. That you have world's largest investors willing to come to India, bidding aggressively, supplying cheap power to the Indian market, which is what the consumer wants. So I think all said and done, it's a kind of a balanced view from an Indian point of view.
Great. And that is sort of a really good segue into the next question. You talked about the financing and you explained really well about how the finance is not really a problem even today and going forward. So I want you to now focus a little bit on the political, regulatory, and I'm personally very interested in this social challenges. You touched a little bit about the land. How much of these three, political, regulatory, and social issues, will be a challenge going forward? If you can take the question one by one, that would be great.
Sure. So I'm not able to kind of see a huge political angle to the renewable sector. I think obviously India urgently needs renewables and more renewables to fight climate change, to improve air quality, to diversify away from coal, and to that extent, it's the sector enjoys very wide political support, and of course, all the early phases of development of renewables, they happened during Congress governments, UPA 1, UPA 2. Yeah, so, in my view, that is not really a political issue. I think it is not really about which government or which political party supports or doesn't support renewable. I think it is a typical center state issue in the sense that the center has got the big picture. They are setting up the policy and the targets, etc. So they are very, very keen that the sector grows as rapidly as possible. But the states are taking a much more short term and almost like a transactional view of renewables. They just want cheap power, and they are very happy to wait for the next tender when the power prices come down. Somebody used the word a shopping of PPAs. So if PPA from one tender is more expensive, but the other PPA is not cheaper, let's just go to the second PPA and let's kind of renegotiate or abandon the first PPA. So the states, and ultimately, to be fair, it is the states which have to actually run the power sector. Given the way the sector is kind of set up in India, it is the discoms who are buying the power, who have to pay for the power, and then ultimately supply this power to the consumers. So I think that is where I think the issues between center and states kind of get magnified. And if you see, which are the states which are problem states for renewables today, I don't think that you will find any kind of consistent story across political parties. I think if you see the states which are kind of big problem areas, I think they continue to be like Tamil Nadu, UP, I would say even Maharashtra. So, I think there is no cogent story that you can build along political lines in terms of uh, party A versus party B trying to support or not support renewables. I think the issue is more at how the policy framework and the project options are run at the central level and then at the state level. And that is a much bigger issue of about how the power sector has been kind of constitutionally set up in India. And I think there is this big disconnect between center and state, which is leading to these various issues at the state level. Uh, at the regulatory level, I think that is unfortunately one of the missing pieces in the jigsaw. To accommodate more renewable capacity into the country, we need much more urgent regulatory action on a number of different fronts. Now, let me just, before I go to that, let me just talk about some of the positive things that have happened. So, now we have a real-time trading of power. We have a green power trading window on the exchanges. I think by and large, the CERC and the state regulatory framework is working well, except some possible aberrations. RPOs have not been enforced, but I think they're beginning to be now enforced, and that urgency is kind of coming more and more into the regulatory structure. But I think where the regulatory framework is kind of getting left behind is that how to, try to make renewables more mainstream and more firm source of power. And by that, what I mean is, for example, storage, right? Everybody realizes that storage is critical for smoothing and providing firm power using renewables as the base resource. But to use storage, we need all kinds of regulatory reform for storage projects to use power from the grid and for them to inject power back into the grid. Now, that is not available in India even today. So the only storage-based projects which are being developed right now are being co-located and as part of the renewable projects. So it is a renewable project like a solar or a wind project, which has to have its own storage facility. And then they can charge storage only with renewable power and inject power back into the grid. Now, that is a very severe limitation of how storage can be used. So I think ideally what you want to do is, you don't even need renewable power for using storage. Somebody can, if you're producing more power in the day when you don't need power, storage should be able to suck up that power and then inject that power back into the grid when the evening peak loads come. But today you can't do that because the regulations don't allow that to happen. Second thing that needs to happen is that today, for example, trading of power, the only thing which is traded is power itself. You can only buy and sell power. But in the West, if you see, there's all kinds of trading in a lot of different instruments, which is making power capacity available, frequency response, up and down, ramp up and ramp down periods, which means how fast power plants can come up from zero to operating and go back down from operating to zero levels. So there's all kinds of these fancy instruments, which is often called ancillary services, which are traded on the exchanges, which are needed to make to let renewables grow faster. And those ancillary services, we're still kind of in very very early stages of ancillary services. Then there are things like demand management of consumers, right? It is not only the power supply which can fluctuate, but you can actually send demand signals to the consumers. So, for example, if there is more power available in the daytime and less power in the evening, supply, you can have time of the day tariffs, which are much more acute to reflect power demand and supply. And then there is something called demand side management, which is you pay consumers. Consumers don't just pay to the grid for using power. The grid can pay to the consumers for adjusting their power demand depending on the power supply. So they can be a much more interactive two-way relationship between the grid and the consumer. Those kinds of things are still not happening today. It is fine, so long as renewables is still in the early stages of growth. But then as the sector grows much more, these kinds of things the challenges of managing so much of intermittent power into the grid will actually become very acute very, very shortly, in my view, because you already have about 90 gigawatts of renewable capacity, and India's total power demand is only 170 gigawatts. So we are already at more than 50% of renewable power, which is must run. Now, in 2 more years' time, that will go up to 120 gigawatts. So 120 gigawatts against 180 gigawatts. Very soon, I think we'll start seeing a situation where either renewable power starts getting curtailed or the discoms start renegotiating the PPAs because they can't absorb so much intermittent, unpredictable power unless there is a whole heap of regulatory action on ancillary services, demand side management, more vibrant trading markets, etc., etc. So I think that is where the regulatory framework, I think, is still kind of behind the times by at least about 3 to 5 years, in my view.
So just a very quick follow-up question on that. Is anybody in the government or even in the industry pushing for it, or sort of acting as a champion for the whole host of sort of regulatory issues that you talked about, which are so critical going forward?
So I think my view is that I think the government and the private sector are constantly firefighting. I think they're constantly firefighting, and they're basically mainly living in today. What is the problem today? What do I have to solve today? And it's a very short-term view. And there are all kinds of reasons. I'm not kind of finding fault with anybody, but there are all kinds of reasons. I think even, for example, MNRE and SECI, agencies like SECI are severely understaffed, in my view. They're severely underskilled. They need much more manpower, skill base, etc., to develop the kinds of policies that we're talking about. I think the only people I see who are actually doing good work in this space are actually some of the international agencies. For example, Germany, GIZ, KfW, etc. They do a lot of work with the Indian government, advising them on policy development, etc. Agencies like World Bank, IFC, US government has a mission. There was a 5-year mission along with MNRE and Government of India called US Aid, and they had a PACE program with different programs: PACE A, PACE B, PACE C, PACE D. So, some of these international agencies who actually have a vested interest because India is seen as the fastest growing power market in the world. And it is, I think, one of the only countries which is still so heavily invested in coal. and continues to invest in more and more coal even today. So I think there are many international agencies who are really kind of very keen that India transits away from fossil fuels to renewables. Because it is critical to the fight against climate change, and they are, I think, in my view, doing very good work. But very often, unfortunately, that work kind of gets swept away or kind of sits at the back of priorities because the government has got more urgent things to attend to.
Wonderful. So, my last question on this very interesting topic about challenges is if you can shed some light on the social aspects. You talked about skills and you talked about land issues. So, if you can elaborate on that, that would be great.
Sure, Sandeep. So I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer this, but I think from the consumer's point of view, of course, there are various dimensions where renewables come into play. First and foremost, the every individual needs 24/7 firm power, wherever they are, irrespective of their economic and social status, etc. And I think today, many consumers or many people, even the 300 million people who have been kind of connected to the grid, supposedly in the last 2 years, they still don't have reliable power, according to Niti Aayog's own survey, which was done recently. So I think the supply of regular power is very important for social and economic improvement in their social and economic status of these people in terms of the education opportunities they have, the economic and the livelihood opportunities they have, the healthcare facilities that they have access to. So I think that is a very, very critical aspect still for a very substantial part of our population. The second thing I kind of see more and more is that, of course, these renewable projects are being developed now in very remote areas, very often displacing large number of people, uh, either displacing them from where they're living or even displacing their livelihoods because they've been grazing their cattle there or they've been kind of doing some farming over there, etc. Now, it is a very tricky situation, and I don't blame anybody. But what is happening on the ground is that the government is saying that we need to acquire, thousands of acres of land for developing solar and wind projects. And if anything, there is more pressure on the government to do it faster and faster. And in the rush to do that, what is happening is that all these environmental and social issues are getting ignored. And in India, more and more actually, the government is saying there needs to be a single window clearance, and we don't need to carry out any environmental study or a social study, etc., while you're setting up these projects. So what is happening to the livelihoods of these people, where they're living, their houses, do they have enough opportunities to kind of earn their incomes, do they even have access to water, because now in many places groundwater is being sucked for cleaning solar panels, for example, in some of the desert areas. Water which was meant for irrigation and for drinking is being diverted away in many areas because there's like you hear about mafia, which is kind of supplying water to solar projects and diverting water illegally, etc. So there are all these kinds of issues which will only get more acute over a period of time. Now, international agencies, for example, are very aware that when you're setting up these projects, you need to carry out an environmental and social impact assessment, which is India. In India, we still take the view that setting up a project faster is more important than worrying about some of these other things. And I think that is not sustainable. So I think that is something which is a big problem in my view, which will get worse over time. And I think the government needs to be much more sensitive and much more careful going forward on this front. And I think the other dimension to the social aspect is that, one of the major advantages and the unique facets of renewables is that it's a very modular technology. You can have a tiny little module which is just powering one solar lantern or a lamp, right? So, this is what the distributed renewables or the off-grid solar, etc., what we call. Now, in India, the focus predominantly has been on setting up larger and larger projects as fast as you possibly can. And I think we've completely given the go by to. Of course, there are some policies available to the government and some subsidies being given for off-grid solar, etc. But I think those are token gestures, in my view, and they don't go anywhere near the potential of what needs to be done to actually exploit the full potential and the opportunity for distributed and off-grid renewables. So, even remarkably, when it came to supplying power to these 300 million people, the government basically decided that they will expand the grid at a cost of, billions and billions of dollars rather than set up local, small 10 kilowatt and 20 kilowatt systems in local communities at a much lower cost. So, no, I think that is a missed opportunity in my view. And some of the things that the government is doing, for example, solar pumps are not the best solution to meet the needs of the farmers and the rural communities. So I think that is kind of not great to kind of see that part of the market grow as fast as other parts.
You said two very interesting points. First, you talk about, sort of all the issues happening with land acquisition and, um, and related to environmental and social aspects. And then you talked about sort of how we could have really gone the distributed way. And perhaps that could have helped solve some of these land issues as well, because you don't need land. You can, solar lanterns, of course, are very small, but you can set up small microgrids in small amounts of land and so on. That's, I'm just making an observation that is something that I think we missed.
Sure.
I had a similar question. You mentioned about off-grid. I was about to ask that how can a country like this make off-grid or decentralized solar more attractive? Because commonsensical wise, it is something that we should have taken up, because taking grid is costlier and then thermal power burns more. And then obviously there are land issues, social issues. What, in your view, can make off-grid solar or decentralized solars as attractive for investors as grid-connected is? We'll start with that, and then probably we can move on to what other solutions you think Indian renewable market deserves. But let's start with decentralized.
Yeah, so Shreya, I don't have all the answers, unfortunately. I think it is a very, very complex domain. And to be fair, I'm not suggesting that the utility scale renewables should not be given a priority. I think all I'm saying is that we have put all our eggs in the utility scale basket, whereas we should have kind of taken a much more even view of the sector and put equal focus perhaps on the different off-grid and other opportunities. In terms of what could be done to promote more off-grid, so I think it needs a completely different level of policy paradigm and business models and financing models. I think there is a lot of ESG money which is coming in from international entities. So even today, if you look at who is investing in off-grid businesses in India, so it is one of the leading companies, which was Simpa Networks, which was bought over by NG from France. Rockefeller Foundation is a major investor in off-grids and all the other distributed home systems. So Tata Power is belatedly now beginning to invest more in off-grid systems. So I think there is a lot of money which is available. The need is really for the government to develop again a kind of a long-term policy vision and provide people like a stable policy and business model for them to develop their own businesses in this regard. I think the other beauty about off-grid is if you create off-grid businesses, you provide more livelihoods to people in the same communities. People who are setting up the grid, managing the grid, doing all the billing and the metering system, etc. So I think we need policy trust. We need possibly subsidized financing to these businesses. And a stable long-term policy, because until you tell somebody that for the next 10 years you can run this mini grid and recoup your investment, nobody is going to make a private investment there. Right now it is basically either uh, subsidized money or some kind of impact investment which is going into these businesses, which is not necessarily looking for a commercial return on capital. So, but I think until and unless we make it work on a commercially attractive basis, the big money is not going to move into that market.
Right. I think that brings us to the last question, which is that going forward, what do you think the policymakers, the industry should keep in mind uh, for the growth of the sector, also for the kind of returns that the sector brings? So, in terms of, let's start with what, in terms of policy, you think are the three big push that this sector needs, the three major things that the renewable sector needs in terms of policy?
Yeah, so I think to some extent we touched upon this already. One thing we did not touch upon is the word discount, right? So I think the discoms continue to be a major overhang and a burden on the entire sector. That reform has been long pending, and even today, unfortunately, it is not clear how and when the financial condition of the discoms will improve. And that is a major risk for the whole sector. And if anything, it is actually getting bigger. Despite the government has already started injecting money as part of that, liquidity package from PFC and RSC into the discoms, but even on a monthly basis, the outstandings to the power producers, they continue to go up and up and up, and they are at an all-time high today. So I think that is no, it is not specifically only for renewables; it applies to the whole power sector. But I think it's a major risk for the entire sector. The second, of course, is, I would say, very broadly speaking, we need policy stability and a much more coordinated policy across different departments of the government. And just taking the example of manufacturing, for example, it to implement a duty over a 2 or 3 year time period is not good enough, and in fact, it is counterproductive. We need to provide much more longer period of duty visibility, for example, as just one measure to the investors. But then much more needs to be done to bring manufacturing home in a very sustainable way. We need to invest in domestic R&D. We need to have a domestic ecosystem of suppliers. We need to be able to provide land and power to these businesses at a competitive price, etc. So, logistics in terms of transport and infrastructure facilities for these companies need to improve. So, that is just one example to say that policy needs to improve, but it needs to improve in a very sustained manner across different departments and with a much more kind of longer time frame for horizon. And third thing I talked about, technology development. I think we have to focus on domestic technology suited towards Indian environment, Indian business needs, etc. And we can't be dependent on international technology forever. I think to me, those three are the main policy objectives. Within that, we can identify land, transmission, and other manufacturing and other areas. But I think these three are the major, prime needs of the sector.
And I know you charge money for this, but if you were to give an advice to an investor coming in India, it's say three. This is something that you should look forward to in India, or this is something that you should be wary of. What are these three top things? You can be discreet.
No, I think so. I think the biggest one I think is that the international investors, they come from a view that just read the contract and just go by the contract, because that is what happens in their countries. The what is written on the piece of paper is very holy. It has to be followed in spirit and in action, etc. Now that doesn't happen in India. I'll just give you one example. The government will say the projects have to be set up within 18 months, and if you don't set up, there'll be penalties. But then what happens is land is not available, transmission is not available, change in locality is not there. So the project is not set up after 18 months. And then the developer goes to the government and says, sorry, A happened, B happened, C happened. And the government says, don't worry, I'll give you more time extension. This is something which doesn't happen in other countries, right? So I think, one thing I would say is that this is not a market for the faint-hearted. This is, you don't think about making a quick buck. Think of the long-term growth opportunity which is there in India, and don't just believe a single word or a document that you read. It really is like an onion. It is an onion with many, many layers, and you have to keep peeling one layer after other to kind of understand what is kind of going on in the market. It's a very challenging market with multiple stakeholders. There is SECI, there's MNRE, there are state governments, there are DISCOMs, there are regulators, CERC, SERC, etc., etc. So, you have to make a long-term investment. You have to be patient. You have to, you have to be prepared for a very aggressive competition, because and and be prepared to compete at in a very tough market, because when you are bidding, it will be very aggressive. When you're trying to build projects, it will be very kind of competitive, aggressive, very challenging to build projects, etc. uh, I would also say, look at the bright side. India is obviously the top three markets worldwide for renewables. uh, More than that, India is the only country which does auctions in such a transparent manner at a very national level. So if you look at China and the US, etc., all the states, and provinces are doing their own thing, and there is no national auctions framework. So in India, when you come, you know that there is going to be 8 to 10 or more gigawatts of renewable power projects which are going to be auctioned under a very consistent open framework. And there is no controversy. Gone are the days where people could say that we don't know how this project has been allocated, whether this project will be honored or not. I also tell the investors that there will be all kinds of challenges. The discount will not pay you on time. Somebody will say, I want to renegotiate, etc. But then the regulatory and the legal system, by and large, it works, right? You might get some heart attack, but you will not die because of these things. So I think, so the positive things are very large market, very transparent, auction-driven market. The regulatory and the legal system, by and large, works, despite some short-term setbacks. The challenges are, it's very, very competitive, cutthroat. You can't just go there, set up projects very quickly, as you might do in other countries. And it's, and you have to be here for the long haul to really understand the market and be very patient with it. The only thing I would say, add to the whole discussion, is that we are a very, very price sensitive country. And, by being so price sensitive, for example, if I look at storage, the only reason we are not doing big storage right now is because prices are very high. Now, prices will go down. Ultimately, they'll come down because internationally, more and more people are scaling up storage. They are using storage. They're building up factories. And then ultimately, prices come down in 3 years' time. And then we will think about how do we grow manufacturing capacity in storage. But it will be too late at that time. Other countries would have already secured access to the minerals and the mines. They would have already done their R&D. They would have already set up hundreds of gigawatts of manufacturing capacity. So I think ultimately, if we want to reap the full benefits, as the government says, if we want to become Atmanirbhar, we can't just say, I want cheap, cheap, cheap of everything. We have to be prepared willing to pay a price for it. We have to be prepared to make an investment in advance and willing to pay a high price, so that ultimately down the years, we can kind of reap all the benefits associated with manufacturing, R&D, technology development, etc. And I think that is where the disconnect is. I think, we are too price focused, and that is kind of doing some damage to the industry, in my view.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time. I think I personally learned a lot.
It's always very enjoyable to talk with you, and obviously very informative. So thank you so much.
For more information about the podcast, visit us online at www.101reporters.com/podcast/the_India_energy_hour. You can also reach out to us on social media and send us your comments and suggestions. My Twitter handle is @SandeepPai with a double I, and Shreya's Twitter handle is @Shreya_J.